Imagine this, friends. Let's make a bold hypothesis. You are walking down a bustling street. This could be Fifth Avenue in New York, Shibuya in Tokyo, or the commercial strip right downstairs from your apartment. You see crowds surging around you, everyone in a rush. Some are on the phone discussing multi-million-dollar deals, others are looking down at their phones scrolling through short videos and letting out brief chuckles, and some are anxiously rushing to their next check-in point. On the surface, this world is incredibly rich. We have the most advanced technology, the most developed economy. And we seem connected to everything. But if you had eyes that could peer into souls, you might see a completely different picture. You would no longer see vibrant, living people, but isolated islands wrapped in transparent bubbles. Inside each bubble, everyone is running frantically, like a hamster on a wheel, consuming to sustain survival, and surviving to consume. Although they stand shoulder to shoulder, spiritually, they are light years apart. Even more terrifying is if a booming voice suddenly descended from the sky and asked, "Who are you?" These people would stop, look up in confusion. And the answers they could give might only be, "I am a teacher, I am a sales manager, I am a delivery driver." Apart from their function in the economic machine, they seem unable to find any vocabulary to define their meaning as a human being. Friends, does this feeling sound familiar? This isn't just modern anxiety, this is the pathology diagnosed for us over half a century ago by Hannah Arendt. We have not only lost ourselves, we have lost the world. Today, I want to take you on a hardcore intellectual expedition. Our protagonist, Hannah Arendt, is not just the historian who wrote the origins of totalitarianism and exposed the nature of Nazism. She is a top-tier thinker holding a scalpel, precisely dissecting the lesions of modern civilization. She will tell us, why do we feel lonely? Why do we feel life is meaningless? And, most terrifyingly, why is this universal sense of meaninglessness the very paving stone leading to a hell on earth? But before we touch that dark abyss, we must return to where it all began. We need to tell a story about philosophy's betrayal of life. Did you know? At the very source of Western philosophy, a massive breakup occurred. This breakup directly determined the way humans have thought for the next 400 years. One could even say it planted the seeds for all our spiritual crises today. The story begins in Athens, 399 BC. That year, an event shook Western civilization, the death of Socrates. Socrates, the greatest sage of ancient Greece, was sentenced to death by the Athenian city-state for corrupting the youth and impiety simply because he liked to chat with people in the square and ask embarrassing questions. He drank the hemlock and died peacefully. This scene was witnessed by his student, Plato, and it broke his heart. Plato completely collapsed at that moment. He thought, this so-called democratic Athens, this city-state we were so proud of, actually killed the wisest and most just man in this land. This world must be mad. So, Plato made a decision. He left Athens in anger. It is said he traveled the world, perhaps even going to North Africa. This departure was not just physical, it was a spiritual rupture. Plato completely despaired of human public life, politics, and that messy reality. Years later, Plato returned to Athens, but he had changed. He founded the Academy, but he no longer went to the square to chat with the old ladies selling vegetables or the blacksmiths, as his teacher Socrates had done. Instead, he closed the gates and started a brand new kind of philosophy. This is the origin of the famous allegory of the cave. Plato said that public opinions and political debates in the real world are nothing but illusory shadows on the cave wall. The true philosopher should turn around, turn his back on this noisy world, and through introspection, through solitary contemplation, walk out of the cave to see the sun that symbolizes truth nearby, that is, the pure world of ideas. Friends, please note this moment. This is what Arendt calls the original sin of Western philosophy, or a massive misconception. Starting from Plato, philosophers established a paradigm: the life of contemplation, vita contemplativa, is higher than the active life, vita activa. This view holds that if you want to attain truth, if you want to become wise, you must live in seclusion. Just like many of our intellectuals today, hiding in ivory towers, or like hermits in log cabins deep in the mountains. They believe that public life is dirty, the masses are stupid, and only solitary thinking is sacred. It's like saying if you want to stay healthy, you must stay in a sterile room forever and never come into contact with people because people are full of germs. This way of thinking dominated Western philosophy for over 2,000 years. Philosophers sat high in the clouds, looking down on the human world, constructing various perfect theoretical models, yet turning a blind eye to the mud and blood on the ground. But Hannah Arendt stood up and said, "No, this is wrong, and it is terribly wrong." In her youth, Arendt was actually a believer in this contemplative life. She studied philosophy in Germany, her mind full of the profound theories of Kant and Heidegger. She thought she would become an elegant female philosopher, spending her life in a study. But history gave her a brutal slap in the face. With the rise of the Nazis and the outbreak of World War II, Arendt witnessed the world around her collapsing. She saw those intellectual friends who usually preached morality and were well-versed in Hegelian dialectics either choose silence in the face of Nazi atrocities or even actively defend the Nazis. She realized that when the world around you is turning into hell, hiding in a study to think about the meaning of existence is not just naive, it is shameful. It's like the Titanic is sinking, and you are still in first class studying the legs of the wine in your glass, taking pride in it. Arendt discovered that traditional philosophy, because it was too obsessed with contemplation, had completely lost the ability to cope with reality's crises. It denied a most fundamental dimension of human existence, the political realm. So, in her later life, Arendt hated being called a philosopher. If you called her a political philosopher, she would correct you, "No, I am a political theorist." This was not just a matter of title, it was a declaration of stance. She wanted to jump down from the heaven of ideas constructed by Plato and return to the dusty square where Socrates once stood. So, what does returning to the square mean? This leads to Arendt's most brilliant and core theoretical framework, the threefold division of human activity. In her masterpiece The Human Condition, Arendt divides our human activities on Earth into three levels: labor, work, and action. These three words might be used interchangeably in daily life, but in Arendt's dictionary, they are worlds apart. Understanding these three words means understanding why modern people live so exhaustedly yet feel so empty. Let's look at the lowest level, labor. What is labor? Simply put, it is what you must do to stay alive. Eating, drinking, sleeping, metabolism. This is our aspect as biological beings, as animals. Arendt calls humans in this state animal labyrinths. What characterizes labor? It is circular and consumptive. You eat today, you have to eat again tomorrow. You sweep the floor today, it gets dirty again tomorrow. Things produced by labor, like food, are meant to be eaten immediately, like cleaning, it is meant to be undone immediately. Labor itself leaves no lasting trace in the world. Imagine Sisyphus pushing the rock up the hill, pushing it up, rolling down, pushing it up, rolling down. This is the essence of labor, it is to maintain the biological cycle of life. It is enslaved by necessity. If we don't labor, we die. In the eyes of the ancient Greeks, this state of being busy for survival was actually the state of a slave. Because you are held hostage by your bodily needs, you are not free. Next is the second level, work. This is a bit higher than labor. Work is not to satisfy bodily metabolism but to create an artificial world. Arendt calls those who engage in this activity homo faber, man the maker. For example, you chop down a tree to make a table, you mine ore to build a car, you write a novel, you build a skyscraper. These all belong to the work. The products of work are not consumed instantly like food, they are usable, they can remain. Work gives us a physical environment in this natural world where we can settle down and get on with our lives. With houses, we don't have to sleep in the open, with tools, we can transform nature. Work allows us to detach from the pure cycle of nature and establish a relatively stable objective world. If labor is for staying alive, then work is for living more comfortably, more like a human being. But this is not yet the highest realm of human activity. In Arendt's view, the reason humans are human. The reason we can transcend animals and machines is because of the third level of activity, action. What is action? This is the most fascinating and difficult to understand part of Arendt's theory. Action refers to the direct interaction between people without any material intermediary. It happens in the public realm, among equal citizens. It manifests primarily as speech and deeds. In ancient Greece, this corresponded to debates in the square, political assemblies, and participation in public affairs. Arendt believed that only through action can we transform from that group of people into this unique person. Think about it, in labor, we are all the same biological beings, needing to eat and sleep. In work, we might just be a function on an assembly line. But only when you step onto the public stage, use your language to express your views, and use your behavior to influence others, do you demonstrate the unique who you are. Arendt has a very core saying, without action in the political realm, the world is just a heap of physical existence. Only through interaction in the public realm can we establish the unique identity of who am I. For example, a building, a product of work, is just a pile of stones if it is not used, discussed, and given meaning by people in public life. A tree, a thing of nature, is just a biological plant if no one praises it in poetry or discusses protecting it in parliament. It is action, that is, human political life, that injects soul and meaning into this cold physical world. Okay, having said all that, you might ask, what does this have to do with the emptiness of us modern people? It has everything to do with it. Arendt's diagnosis of modern society is, we are a generation living in an inverted pyramid. In ancient Greece, or in Arendt's ideal state, the purpose of people's labor was to liberate themselves from survival pressure, then to go to work to create tools. With the ultimate goal of devoting themselves to action, to live a political life, to pursue immortal fame and public good. Politics was the end, economics, labor and work, was the means. But in modern society, or starting from the Enlightenment, we have completely flipped this structure. We have to mention the famous Enlightenment. We usually think the Enlightenment was the beginning of light, bringing reason and science. But Arendt coldly points out that the Enlightenment made a fatal mistake. It systematically dissolved the political realm and degraded humans into economic men. Think about what John Locke said. He said the purpose of government is to protect life, liberty, and property. Sounds great, right? But the logic behind it is, politics is no longer the end, politics has become the means. We participate in politics, hold elections, make laws, with the sole purpose of letting us make money in peace, live our lives in peace, and secure our private property in peace. Thus, politics was instrumentalized, and economics became the highest purpose. This shift brought a terrible consequence. The dimension of action in our lives was excised. We no longer care about public affairs, we no longer care about who I am. We only care about what I have and what job I do. Arendt calls this type of modern person economic man. We are trapped in the dead loop of labor and work. Think about the life of a modern person. Even if you are an executive with $1 million salary, your life, in Arendt's view, might still be the life of an animal labyrinth. You work anxiously every day to earn more money. You earn money to buy a bigger house, a better car, more expensive organic food. This is called consumption. Consumption is to recover your physical strength so you can continue to work more vigorously the next day. This forms a perfect closed loop: production, consumption, reproduction, reconsumption. We run in this cycle, gasping for breath, running faster and faster. When you ask a modern person, "Who are you?" he will subconsciously pull out a business card. "I am the vice president of such and such company." Or he will demonstrate his spending power. "I am the guy driving the Porsche." You see, our identity has become extremely cheap and pixelated. Our identity is completely attached to our position in the economic machine or the goods we buy. This is no longer the hero who delivers a speech in the square, displaying unique personality, charisma, and being remembered by the masses. This is just a replaceable part. Arendt calls this state world alienation. This is even more serious than the self-alienation Marx spoke of. Marx felt capitalism alienated people because workers didn't get the fruits of their labor. But Arendt says, no, the problem isn't who gets the fruits, the problem is that our entire way of life is wrong. We have lost a true public realm. In this realm, we could have shone like distinct stars, seeing each other, hearing each other, establishing our unique existence. But now, this realm has vanished, replaced by a massive public economy. In this economy, each of us is imprisoned in our own private desires. Although we live among crowds, we feel unprecedentedly lonely. This loneliness isn't because no one eats with you, but because you feel you don't belong to this world at all. You are like an atom floating in a vacuum, moving at high speed, but without roots, without direction, and without weight. This is the modern landscape Arendt paints for us, a group of busy, anxious, empty, laboring animals, in a world without political radiance, existing merely for the sake of survival. And the most terrifying thing is, this massive, atomized, empty state is precisely the favorite breeding ground for that monster called totalitarianism. Now, let's zoom in and see how exactly this happened. Why would Arendt think that the modern civilization we are so proud of is actually a giant trap? Why do we feel an unprecedented hollowness inside, despite possessing unprecedented wealth and freedom? All of this starts with the topic of how the housekeeper became the master. We have to talk about a word first: home. In ancient Greece, the world was divided very clearly. One was the home, oikos, and the other was the city-state, polis. Home is the private realm, the place to solve survival problems. You eat, sleep, raise children, and handle all the trivialities of sustaining life at home. The city-state is the public realm, where you step out of your house to converse with others as equals, to pursue honor and immortality. The Greeks had a concept: matters of the home are private matters and must be hidden, privative, because they are full of necessity and unfreedom. You have to eat. Only by stepping out of the house and entering the square are you a free man. But a major event occurred in modern society, which Arendt calls the rise of the social. What does this mean? Simply put, those trivial matters that originally belonged inside the home, production, consumption, resource allocation, suddenly burst through the door and occupied the public square. The entire nation turned into a supergigantic family. Think about what our politics discusses now. Turn on the news. What are parliaments arguing about? GDP growth, employment rates, price indices, medical insurance, tax policies. Notice something? All these topics, in the eyes of the ancient Greeks, belong entirely to household chores. At this point, the government is no longer a stage for citizens to display virtue and pursue justice. The government has become a super housekeeper. The president has become a professional manager, and his KPI is to manage the ledger of this big family well so that everyone is fed and clothed. You might say, what's wrong with that? Isn't letting common people live a good life the greatest justice? Arendt would coldly tell you, when politics is reduced entirely to an appendage of economics, when the state's highest goal is merely to guarantee the smooth operation of the life process, humanity loses the only chance to transcend its animal nature. This is the side effect of the Enlightenment. Thinkers like John Locke designed a precise system telling us, politics itself has no value, politics is only there to protect our private property and physical safety. In other words, we do politics so we can go home and be an animal labyrinth in peace. What did this lead to? It led to a complete inversion of means and ends. Originally, economics was the means to give us leisure to engage in politics, the end. Now, politics has become the means to let us engage in economics, the end, more efficiently. This inversion locks every one of us into a pure economic function. Our value in society depends entirely on what we can produce or what we can consume. Next comes the collusion between capitalism and Marxism. On this issue, Arendt displayed her astonishing intellectual penetrating power. She offended both the left and the right simultaneously because she discovered that when it comes to degrading humans into laboring animals, capitalism and Marxism are actually wearing the same pair of pants. Look at capitalism first. Adam Smith and his ilk told us that man is a rational economic man, and maximizing profit is a law of nature. So, we pour all our time into labor to exchange for more consumer goods. We call this endless cycle of production and consumption progress and happiness. But Arendt says this is merely an accelerated version of biological metabolism. We create no lasting world within it, we just devour nature like locusts and then excrete waste. Look at Marxism again. Although Marx is the mortal enemy of capitalism, in Arendt's view, Marx did not escape this vicious circle. Marx was even more extreme. He defined man as a laboring animal labyrinth, believing labor is the essence of man. Marx's ideal society is one where productivity is highly developed, and no one needs to worry about politics, only needing to labor happily. Arendt sharply points out that Marx wanted to liberate humanity from the pain of labor. But what happens after this liberation? If humans know nothing but labor, then a society of laborers without labor will be the most terrifying nightmare, because we will be completely swallowed by emptiness. It's like telling a donkey that has been pulling a millstone all its life, you don't have to pull the millstone anymore. The donkey asks, then what do I do? You answer, you can eat grass to your heart's content. For the donkey, this might be enough, but for a human, it is far from enough. So, whether it is Western liberalism or Eastern socialism, under the grand framework of modernity, they both committed the same error. They both attempted to solve all human problems through economic means, thereby eliminating politics and eliminating human plurality and uniqueness. Let's shift our gaze to a ubiquitous cancer in this world. Whether it is the notorious socialist former Soviet Union, the current totalitarian China, or the free United States, bureaucracy prevails. And this creates the tyranny of nobody. When politics becomes the management of household chores, when the state becomes a big corporation, the method of rule changes. It no longer needs decisive politicians, it only needs one thing: bureaucracy. Arendt's critique of bureaucracy is profound. She believes bureaucracy is a form of rule by nobody. In a massive bureaucratic system, no single person feels they need to take responsibility. The clerk stamping the document says, "I'm just following regulations." The division chief issuing the order says, "I'm just executing policy from above." The minister making the policy says, "I'm just conforming to the laws of economic development." Everyone is a cog, everyone is innocent, but everyone combined might be manufacturing a massive disaster. This rule by nobody is actually the most brutal form of rule. Because you cannot find a specific enemy, you cannot find an object to reason with or resist. You are facing a cold, inhuman, yet extremely efficient machine. In The Origins of Totalitarianism, Arendt specifically analyzed how bureaucracy paved the way for totalitarianism. She mentioned Lord Cromer's rule in Egypt for the British Empire, and the racist rule in South Africa. She found that the mode of replacing law with decrees, that mode which requires no public debate but only administrative orders to determine the fate of millions, is precisely the embryo of totalitarianism. Under a bureaucratic system, the law is no longer a stable framework protecting civil liberties, but becomes a tool that can be modified at any time to implement some historical law or racial law. This is what Arendt later summarized as lawful lawlessness. So let's lower our gaze from the level of the state machine to the ordinary people, to see how the birth of the masses turns from the people to the mob. When the public realm disappeared, when politics became unreachable administrative management, when everyone was locked in their small circles of making money and consuming, the social structure underwent a drastic change. Previously, society was composed of specific classes like the peasant class, aristocracy, bourgeoisie, or tight-knit communities. Although people had conflicts, everyone knew which group they belonged to and had common interests and demands. But modernity shattered all of this. Capitalist crises, wars, inflation pulverized traditional class structures. What was left? A heap of atomized individuals. Arendt used a word to describe this new crowd: masses. The masses and the people are two different things. The people is a group with organization and common political demands. The masses are loose sand. What characterizes these masses? First, they are isolated. They have no common bond between them, no common interest, not even a common sense of reality. Second, they are politically indifferent. They are no longer interested in traditional political parties because they feel those people don't represent them. Third, and most contradictory, they are both extremely self-centered and extremely eager for self-sacrifice. Sounds contradictory, right? Arendt explains that because these atomized individuals cannot find their place in society, they feel they are superfluous. This sense of worthlessness plunges them into deep despair. As we said in the story at the beginning, they are floating atoms. Because they have no roots, they desperately crave something to attach to give them a direction, even if that direction is destruction. This is why totalitarian movements have a fatal attraction for these people. Totalitarianism isn't like traditional tyranny, asking you to obey but keep your distance. No, totalitarianism says to the masses, give me your pitiful, meaningless little self, and merge into our great race, our great historical current. Although as an individual you are tiny, as a part of this giant machine, you gain eternal meaning. For those who feel thoroughly lonely and helpless in modern society, this call is simply gospel. They are willing to sacrifice their freedom, even sacrifice their lives, just to exchange for that sense of belonging, just to stop being a transparent ghost. Let's talk about totalitarianism. This demon. How exactly is it born? Its breeding ground is worldlessness. Speaking of this, we touch upon the most poignant point in Arendt's thought. She believes that the fundamental reason totalitarianism could rise in the 20th century lies not in how incredibly evil geniuses Hitler or Stalin were, but in the fact that modernity created a massive void of worldlessness. We lost that common world where we could stand side by side, see each other, and act together. We are left with only private, fleshy, desire-filled little worlds. In this state, the relationship between people is severed. Without the mediation of a public world, when we look at others, they are either competitors, stealing our livelihood, or tools, helping us make money. We cannot view the other as a human with dignity and a unique perspective like ourselves. This provides the psychological basis for totalitarian terror. When you don't treat others as humans, and when you feel you aren't a person either, sending a group of people to concentration camps, or walking into one yourself, seems no longer so unthinkable. Arendt warns us, as long as this fundamental logic of modernity does not change, as long as we remain addicted to being happy laboring animals and abandon political responsibility, the spectre of totalitarianism will never disperse. It may not appear in the form of Nazism again, but it will change its face, perhaps technological totalitarianism, perhaps consumer totalitarianism, and descend once more. So, when this monster named totalitarianism truly descends, what does it actually look like? How does it operate? And how does it turn humans into walking dead step by step? Friends, brace yourselves. The following content might make you uncomfortable, even send shivers down your spine. Because we are not talking about distant historical dust, but a virus that could reignite at any moment. Earlier we said totalitarianism is like a monster or a demon, waiting to devour those hollow men lost in modern society. So, what does this monster look like? Is it just a grumpy dictator plus a bunch of thugs waving batons? Hannah Arendt tells us, absolutely not. Totalitarianism is completely different from all the tyrannies, dictatorships, and despotisms we have seen in history. Traditional tyranny is like a fierce tiger, it just wants to scare you into staying home and not causing trouble. As long as you pay taxes and obey, it usually can't be bothered with what you are thinking. But totalitarianism is different. It is like a virus invading at the cellular level. It is not satisfied with you staying at home, it wants to enter your living room, enter your bedroom, and even drill into your cerebral cortex. What it wants is not your obedience, but your complete transformation. It wants to eliminate the possibility of you existing as an individual, turning you into an insignificant cell on its massive body. To see the true face of this monster, Arendt, like a surgeon calm to the point of coldness, dissected the anatomy of totalitarianism for us. She discovered 6 core organs, or 6 faces. If you see any of these 6 faces in certain corners of the world today, please be sure to sound the alarm in your heart. The first face, the leader principle, the deified will. The first face of totalitarianism is the infinitely deified leader. In a totalitarian system, the leader is not just an administrative chief, nor a manager elected through legal procedures. He is molded into some kind of existence beyond mortals. Look at Hitler in Nazi Germany or the Soviet Union under Stalin. The leader's words are law, they are truth, they are even the will of history itself. This is not just simple personality cult. In traditional dictatorships, people might pretend to worship the dictator out of fear, but in totalitarian states, this worship is designed as a religious fanaticism. I think present-day China lies somewhere between the two, leaning closer to the latter stage, which is worth being vigilant about. Arendt points out that the structure of a totalitarian movement is very special. It's like an onion. The core is the leader, surrounded layer by the elite echelon, party members, sympathizers, and the outermost layer is the ordinary masses. The sole purpose of the entire structure's existence is to execute the leader's will. In this system, there is no objective standard of right or wrong. The only standard is this what the leader wants? The leader becomes the brain of the movement, while everyone else must give up thinking and voluntarily become the hands and feet. This surrender is absolute. A qualified totalitarian believer doesn't need to be told what to do, he must learn to divine the leader's intentions. Even taking the initiative to complete those terrible tasks before the leader has even issued an order. The most terrifying thing about this leader principle is that it severs everyone's sense of moral responsibility for their actions. You ask a Nazi officer, "Why did you kill people?" He will say righteously, "I was only executing the leader's will, the responsibility is his, not mine." The second phase, the alienation of the party from election machine to tool of violence. With a leader, you need an organization. This is the second phase, the complete transformation of the party. This is truly a very cunning process. Before totalitarianism seizes power, it usually disguises itself as an ordinary political party. Like the Nazi Party, it participated in elections at first, held campaign rallies, and looked like it wasn't much different from other parties, just with more radical slogans. Many naive people would think, oh well, even if they come to power, they still have to be constrained by the Constitution, right? They still have to be checked by Parliament, right? Dead wrong. Arendt warns us that once a totalitarian party takes power, it undergoes an immediate qualitative change. It will absolutely not become part of the state machine. On the contrary, it will swallow the state machine whole. In totalitarian countries, you will find a strange phenomenon: the party and the state stand side by side, and the party is above the state. This feature seems tailor-made for two certain Eastern countries. It's quite interesting. If there's a chance later, I'll chat with you all about this in detail. Traditional government institutions, like the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Education, courts, are kept, but they become hollow shells. Real power is transferred to the secret institutions within the party, like the Nazi SS, the Soviet secret police. This party no longer exists to represent the interests of certain voters, it turns into a pure tool of violence and a mouthpiece. It will conduct brutal purges internally, and anyone with independent thought who dares to dissent will be physically eliminated. In the end, this party becomes a zombie legion that only mechanically executes the leader's will. The third phase, propaganda and post-truth, constructing a fictitious perfect world. This phase might be the one we modern people resonate with the most. That is propaganda, or in today's words, post-truth politics. Friends, you must pay attention. Totalitarian propaganda and commercial advertising or ordinary political PR are two completely different things. Commercial advertising is to get you to buy things. It might exaggerate, but it usually doesn't dare to completely invert black and white. But the purpose of totalitarian propaganda is not to persuade you to believe a specific fact, like this toothpaste is effective. Its purpose is to construct a completely fictitious, yet logically self-consistent world. Arendt has a deafeningly famous quote: "The aim of totalitarian education has never been to instill convictions but to destroy the capacity to form any." Or essentially, totalitarian propaganda is not to deceive the public with lies, but to make the public believe that there is no such thing as truth. Does this sound familiar? In totalitarian propaganda, facts are irrelevant. If facts do not fit the ideology, then destroy the facts. If the ideology says Jews are an inferior race, then all scientific evidence proving Jews are excellent must be destroyed, and even physics must be rewritten as Aryan physics. If the ideology says Soviet agriculture is the most advanced, then genetics must be abolished and replaced by the pseudoscience of Lysenkoism. Totalitarians discovered a human weakness. Compared to the chaotic and complex reality, the masses prefer a simple, clear, logically perfect lie. The real world is always full of accidents, contradictions, and uncertainties. But totalitarian propaganda offers people a master key that explains everything. Whether it's an economic crisis, a lost war, or social unrest, everything can be explained by a simple conspiracy theory, like it's all the Jews' fault or if it's all infiltration by foreign forces. This propaganda creates a consistent fictitious world. In this world, you don't need to think. You don't need to doubt, you just need to believe. Once you accept the premise of this setting, all subsequent logic is perfect. For people living in this fictitious world, the ability to distinguish between true and false, fact and fiction, gradually atrophies. This intellectual self-mutilation is totalitarianism's most effective means of mind control. The fourth face, lawful lawlessness, law becomes a butcher's knife. The fourth face is very eerie. Arendt calls it lawful lawlessness. This sounds like a paradox. Generally, it's either a state under rule of law, lawful, or a chaotic state without law, lawlessness. How can totalitarianism be both lawful and lawless? This is precisely its evil. Arendt points out that totalitarian regimes usually do not abolish laws, they might even enact terrifyingly cumbersome legal codes. In Nazi Germany, sending a Jew to a concentration camp might require dozens of stamps and filling out countless forms. Every step appeared to be according to law. However, these written laws, positive law, are not the highest authority in the eyes of totalitarianism. Above them, there is a so-called higher law. For the Nazis, this was the law of nature, a race, survival of the fittest. For Stalin, this was the law of history, class struggle. Totalitarians declare that to execute this supreme law of nature or law of history, any human-made laws are stumbling blocks that can be kicked aside. So, when they slaughter Jews, they declare they are executing natural law, accelerating human evolution. When they purge kulaks or counter-revolutionaries, they declare they are executing historical law, accelerating the arrival of communism. Under this logic, crime becomes law enforcement, and murder becomes justice. Law is no longer a shield protecting individual rights but turns into a butcher's knife waved arbitrarily by the ruler. It can be modified, interpreted, and trampled upon at any time according to the needs of the movement. This creates a state of extreme terror. You never know when you might be breaking the law because the law itself is fluid. What was legal yesterday might be a capital offense today. This uncertainty keeps everyone living in deep fear. The fifth face, the concentration camp, the laboratory of humanity. If the first four faces are the appearance of totalitarianism, then the fifth face, the camps, is its heart, its darkest core. Arendt's analysis of concentration camps transcends everyone's imagination. Usually, we think concentration camps are places to detain enemies, force labor, or conduct mass killings. But in Arendt's view, this is just the surface. The concentration camp is essentially a laboratory of totalitarianism. In this laboratory, totalitarians are conducting an ultimate anti-human experiment. They want to verify, can human nature be completely changed? Can a human be turned into a thing that has absolutely no spontaneity, no personality, and only reacts like Pavlov's dog? To achieve this goal, the design of the concentration camp is a progressive stripping. Step 1. Stripping your juridical person. You are no longer a citizen, the law no longer protects you. You can be arrested arbitrarily, without any charges, and without trial. You become an outlaw. Step 2. Stripping your moral person. This is the cruelest. The Nazis not only killed people but forced victims to participate in the killing, like making Jews manage the camps themselves, deciding who goes to the gas chambers. This practice strips the victims of their conscience and the dignity of martyrdom before they die. Your death is no longer a tragedy but becomes an administrative procedure. Step 3. Stripping your individuality. Through starvation, torture, humiliation, and endless mechanical labor, turning you into a living corpse. You no longer have a name, only a serial number. You no longer have thoughts, only instinctive reactions to pain. When a person completely loses spontaneity and becomes a bundle of reacting nerve fibers, the totalitarian experiment is a success. It proves humans can be completely modified, humanity can be thoroughly erased. Arendt warns us that even if the concentration camps were liberated, the shadow of this experiment still hangs over humanity. Because it revealed a terrifying possibility in this technologically highly developed era. If we are willing, we really have the capability to turn humans into industrial raw material. The sixth phase, war and expansion, stop and you die. Finally, the sixth phase. Endless war and expansion. A totalitarian movement is like a chariot without brakes, or a shark that must keep eating to survive. It cannot stop. Why? Because the foundation of totalitarian rule is lies, that fictitious perfect world, and terror. If it stops expanding, stops looking for new enemies, stops manufacturing new crises, the lies inside will be punctured by reality, and its reign of terror will lose its justification. To maintain the fictitious myth of Barian rule of the world or world revolution, it must constantly conquer outwardly. It must impose that fictitious logic onto the whole world. Therefore, Arendt asserts, totalitarian regimes are inherently anti-peace. They will sooner or later move towards war, even if not a hot war, then a state of permanent confrontation aimed at conquering the world or at least conquering neighboring countries. It must maintain its own stability through constant movement. Once the movement stops, totalitarianism collapses. Friends, these are the 6 phases of totalitarianism: the leader principle, alienation of the party, post-truth propaganda, lawful lawlessness, the laboratory of concentration camps, and eternal wars of expansion. This is not just a list of entries in a history book. This is a precisely operating mechanism of destruction. However, the reason this mechanism can operate is not only because of the brutality of the rulers but also because it is rooted in a secret wound deep within the heart of every modern person. That wound is what we mentioned in the first part, loneliness. Why would Arendt say loneliness is the currency of totalitarianism? Why would a person who feels lonely be more likely to become an executioner or a victim? You might say, loneliness? Is that even a big deal? Who isn't lonely in modern times? Don't rush. The loneliness Arendt writes about is completely different from the lonesomeness you and I imagine. To clarify this issue, Arendt performed an extremely brilliant philosophical dismantling. She subdivided the state of a human being alone into 3 concepts: isolation, solitude, and loneliness. These 3 words sound similar, but politically, they represent 3 completely different states of existence. Understand these 3 words, and you understand how totalitarianism breaches our psychological defenses. First is isolation. This is a concept in the political realm. What is isolation? It is separating you from others, cutting off the political ties between you, making you unable to act together. If you live in a traditional dictatorship or under tyranny, what state does the ruler most want you to be in? It is isolation. He will tell you, just make money, live your life, don't hold rallies, don't form associations, don't talk about politics. Under tyranny, the public realm is destroyed, and people cannot gain power through acting together, because power comes from the union of people. This state is isolation. But please note this, but under traditional tyranny, although you are isolated politically, your private life is usually intact. You can go home, close the door, and enjoy family happiness. You can be an artist immersed in your own creation. Your home is still your castle, and your inner self is still free. So, Arendt says, isolation renders people politically impotent, but it does not destroy the integrity of the human personality. Next is the second concept, solitude. This is a very positive, very beautiful state. What is solitude? Arendt gave a very philosophically flavorful definition. Solitude is, I am with myself. Think about it, when you take a quiet walk alone, or think about a problem alone late at night. Although you are one person, you don't feel lonely. Why? Because there are 2 voices talking in your mind. One is I, and the other is myself. Ancient Greek philosophers defined thinking as the soundless dialogue between the soul and itself. When you are in solitude, you are actually engaging in deep communication with your greatest partner in this world, your own conscience, your own reason. In this two-in-one dialogue, you establish your moral standards, and you clarify your thoughts. Therefore, solitude is the premise of all creative activities and the cradle of conscience. A person who can enjoy solitude is a person with a strong inner self and independent judgment. Although he is alone, he possesses the whole world. Finally, we arrive at the most terrible concept, loneliness. If isolation is a political severance, and solitude is a dialogue with the self, then what is loneliness? Arendt says, loneliness is, I am deserted by others and also deserted by myself. When you are in loneliness, that self who could talk to you has disappeared. You try to think, but your mind is in chaos, unable to find the voice that responds to you. You try to look for others, but you are surrounded by cold walls. This loneliness is not an emotion, but an ontological uprootedness. You feel you have no place in this world. Whether you are alive or dead makes no difference to this world. You have become a thorough superfluous man. Arendt keenly points out that this loneliness is precisely the soil upon which totalitarianism depends for survival. Why? Because a person who feels thoroughly lonely has lost their sense of trust in reality. Please think about a profound question: how do we know the world before us is real? It is not because I have eyes to see and hands to touch. It is because others can also see what I see, and others can also touch what I touch. It is our common sense, our shared perception with others, that constitutes our certainty of reality. But when totalitarianism severs all connections between people, plunging us into a state of complete atomization, we lose that common world. Immediately after, totalitarianism destroys our capacity for solitude through omnipresent terror and brainwashing. When the secret police might kick down the door at any moment, when your child might report you at any moment, when you dare not have heretical thoughts even under your covers, you dare not talk to yourself anymore. The partner in your heart has been strangled. Thus, you fall into absolute loneliness. In this state, reality becomes blurred, and the boundary between truth and lies disappears. Because you cannot verify reality through others, and you cannot confirm conscience through self-dialogue. At this moment, totalitarian ideology steps in. It says to you, forget those chaotic realities, come believe in my logic. As long as you believe in race struggle or class struggle, everything can be explained. For a person on the brink of madness in the abyss of loneliness, this logical straw is so tempting. Even if this logic is insane, like needing to kill all Jews to save the world, it at least offers a false consistency and sense of security. So, Arendt reached that famous conclusion: the ideal subject of totalitarian rule is not the convinced Nazi or the convinced communist, but people for whom the distinction between fact and fiction and the distinction between true and false no longer exist. Arendt used a very vivid metaphor to describe the social state under totalitarian rule: the iron band. Under traditional tyranny, people are like being in a desert. Although isolated from each other, isolation, there is still space in between, there is still room to move freely. But under totalitarianism, everyone is like being tightly bound together by a giant iron band. The space between people is completely squeezed out. We are pressed tightly together, but this does not make us more intimate. Instead, it makes us lose our contours as individuals. In this state of being strangled by the iron band, which is what Arendt calls terror, plurality vanishes. Everyone fuses into a giant, singular one man who only reacts with conditioned reflexes. This compression destroys not only the public political space but also the private inner space. This is why in totalitarian countries, people often exhibit a strange selflessness. But this is not noble selflessness, it is because they feel their self no longer has value and is not worth protecting. Arendt mentioned a heartbreaking detail in her book. In the concentration camps, some prisoners showed not fear, but a numb submission before being sent to the gas chambers. Because before their physical death, their soul, that self capable of thinking, judging, and solitude, had already been killed. They had already become the living dead. Friends, speaking of this, you might feel this is far away from us. After all, we don't live in concentration camps. But please recall the picture of modern society we mentioned at the beginning. The Enlightenment gave us freedom but dismantled traditional community and religious bonds. Capitalism gave us wealth but turned us into atomized economic animals. Our current society is full of people who are lonely because they cannot stand solitude. Look around us, how many people cannot be away from their phones for a moment? How many people feel inexplicable panic and anxiety once they are idle and facing themselves? This panic is precisely because we have lost the ability for solitude, lost the ability to talk with ourselves. As soon as we have free time, we must fill ourselves with short videos, games, and likes on social media. We desperately grab outwards, trying to prove we still exist. Reading a book seriously or watching a profound movie is fine, but it's too slow, it takes too much time, and what I need is speed, to fill my attention every single moment. This state, Arendt calls the typical symptom of mass society. And under this pathology, although we seem free, our inner defenses are actually incredibly fragile. If one day, society is in turmoil, the economy collapses, and a new strongman stands up, promising us a grand meaning, promising eternal security if we just hand over ourself and merge into the collective. Will we, like the Germans back then, cheer and walk towards the abyss to escape that bone-eroding loneliness? This is absolutely not alarmism. At the end of The Origins of Totalitarianism, Arendt wrote, "Totalitarianism is not a historical interlude that ended with the death of Hitler or Stalin. It is a potential of modernity, a sword of Damocles hanging over our heads. As long as we remain a group of lonely, rootless atoms who only produce and consume, this sword could fall at any time." So, facing this immense danger, what should we do? Is there an antidote? More importantly, when an ordinary, even somewhat mediocre person like you or me gives up thinking under this system, what will he become? Will he become a demon? Or will he become something even more incomprehensible to us? This leads to Arendt's most controversial and soul-shaking discovery in her later years, the banality of evil. This part is the most shocking, most controversial part of Hannah Arendt's thought, and the part that stings our souls the most. Please pull your thoughts back from the smoke of World War II and follow me to Jerusalem in 1961. That year, Israeli agents kidnapped a fugitive high-ranking Nazi official in Argentina and brought him back to Jerusalem for trial. This man was named Adolf Eichmann. Who was he? He was the logistics manager in Nazi Germany responsible for the final solution to the Jewish question. Simply put, he was responsible for arranging trains to transport millions of Jews from all over Europe to concentration camps to die. He was the man who pressed the button of death. When the trial began, the eyes of the whole world were focused on that courtroom in Jerusalem. Hannah Arendt also went to the scene as a special correspondent for The New Yorker. At that time, what kind of defendant was everyone expecting to see? Everyone thought, having killed so many people, this must be Satan reincarnated, right? He must look hideous, with evil light in his eyes, his mouth full of fanatical theories of hating Jews. People expected to see a villain like Richard III in Shakespeare, a great demon whose evil shook the heavens and earth. But when Arendt sat in the courtroom, looking at Eichmann sitting inside the bulletproof glass box, she was stunned. The whole world was stunned. The person sitting in that glass box was too ordinary. He looked unremarkable, even a bit seedy. He spoke softly and was very polite. He even had a bit of a cold and kept blowing his nose. What caused the most breakdown was that when the judge asked him why he killed people, he did not utter any anti-Semitic hate speech. On the contrary, his mouth was full of bureaucratic clichés. "Your Honor, I was just obeying the law. I was just executing orders from above. I don't hate Jews, I even have Jewish friends. The biggest regret of my life is that my military rank didn't go up one more grade." Arendt looked at this man, and she felt a fear deeper than facing a demon. She discovered that Eichmann was not a demon, he was a clown. He was not stupid, but he had a fatal flaw, thoughtlessness. Please note, when Arendt says thoughtlessness, she doesn't mean he was brainless or uneducated. She means he had completely lost the ability to look at problems from others' perspectives, and lost the ability to talk with his own inner self. His brain was filled with Nazi slogans, bureaucratic rules, and ladders of promotion. Apart from these, he had nothing. He was like a machine with a set program. As long as the command was input, he would execute it precisely, even if the command was send the children on this train to the gas chamber. Even when facing the gallows, he spoke in the kind of platitudes used at funerals, as if he were acting in a bad play. This is the famous concept Arendt proposed that enraged countless people, the banality of evil. This concept overturned Western civilization's understanding of evil for thousands of years. Previously, we thought evil was profound, magical, some kind of powerful dark will. But Arendt tells us, no, true evil is often superficial. It spreads over the earth like a fungus, it has no depth, nor roots. It does not originate from some evil genius, but from a terrifying void. So, how does an ordinary person, a good neighbor, a good father, turn into this kind of banal demon? Arendt saw the epitome of modern man in Eichmann. Eichmann was a typical joiner. The thing he feared most in his life was not having an organization. He confessed in court, if I didn't receive orders, I really wouldn't know how to live. A leaderless, difficult individual life lay before me, it was too terrifying. Think about the scene we mentioned earlier where modern people need to provide attention quickly at every moment. Does it seem familiar? This is the consequence of loneliness and worldlessness we discussed in the previous parts. A person like Eichmann, because of inner emptiness, because of the loss of the ability to establish a self in the public realm, desperately needed to attach himself to a powerful organization, to a leader. When he joined the Nazi Party and put on that uniform, he felt he finally was someone. To maintain this identity, to gain recognition in this system, like a promotion, he was willing to do anything. Even more terrifying, the legal system of totalitarianism gave him a false conscience. In a normal society, killing is illegal, and we feel guilty. But in Nazi Germany, killing was law-abiding, and not killing was illegal. Eichmann said, if I disobeyed orders and saved Jews, my conscience would be troubled because I betrayed the leader, betrayed the country. You see, when a person gives up independent thinking, gives up the dialogue with the self, solitude, and instead outsources the right of judgment of conscience to authority, to the law, to so-called historical laws, he completely loses the qualification of being human. He becomes a part. A part feels no guilt for the things it crushes. This is Arendt's sternest warning: the greatest evil is often not committed by those whose hearts are filled with hate, but by those technical bureaucrats and obedient subjects who never ask why but only ask how. Friends, Eichmann is dead, and the Nazis have fallen. But has Eichmann really disappeared? Look at our world today. That media person who manufactures fake news and incites opposition for traffic, is he thinking? That keyboard warrior who follows the crowd to cyberbully strangers and frantically likes malicious comments in the carnival of internet violence, is he thinking? As long as we still view ourselves as a cog in the economic machine, as long as we still use "I'm just doing my job" or "everyone does it" to justify ourselves, we are only one step away from the banality of evil. So, what should we do? In this atomized, hollowed-out modern world, is there any hope for us? Hannah Arendt did not leave us only with despair. Deep in her thought lies an antidote. This antidote is what she called for in The Human Condition, a return to taction. First, we must reclaim the capacity for solitude. In this era of information overload, we must learn to turn off our phones, turn off the noise, go back home, and quietly face ourselves. We must restart that two-in-one the dialogue. Before you do something, ask yourself, if I do this, can I still live with myself in peace? Thinking is the first line of defense Arendt gives us. Thinking may not bring you knowledge, nor necessarily help you get rich, but it acts like the wind, blowing away those rigid dogmas and awakening your conscience. It enables you, at the critical moment, in that split second, to say that word, no. Second, we must bravely step into the public realm. Stop being just a laboring animal huddled in a private nest. Stop caring only about your house, car, and stocks. Go out. Pay attention to the affairs of your community, participate in discussions of public topics, and see people who are different from you. Arendt says that what totalitarianism fears most is plurality. It wants to turn everyone into one voice, and what we must do is emit different voices. Even under the darkest totalitarian rule, resistance is possible. Arendt mentioned the story of Danes saving Jews during World War II, and those ordinary people who refused to salute Hitler. This resistance doesn't require you to be a superhero. Sometimes, it simply means non-support. When everyone raises their hand, you put yours down. When everyone is fanatical, you remain indifferent. This tiny bit of a non-cooperation is the most powerful tearing of the monolithic reality of totalitarianism. Third, we must love this world, Amor Mundi. This is Arendt's most moving phrase. Although she experienced war, exile, and persecution throughout her life, and although she saw through the darkness of human nature, she still deeply loved this world. She said, "We are not born to die, we are born for a natality, new beginnings." With every new life born, the world has another chance to restart. Every new action, every sincere word, injects a new miracle into this world. Totalitarianism attempts to close off the future with terror and lies, turning history into a dead end. But as long as someone is willing to stand up, willing to act, willing to shoulder the responsibility of being human, this closure will be broken. Friends, our intellectual expedition is coming to an end. We departed from Plato's cave, crossed the wasteland of modernity, faced the abyss of totalitarianism, and finally, before the judgment seat in Jerusalem, found the key to redemption. Hannah Arendt tells us that being a true human being is hard. It requires you to think in solitude, act in the crowd, and love this world in despair. But this is precisely where our dignity as human beings lies. At this moment, when you turn off this videoed audio and return to your busy and trivial life, please do not forget. Do not let yourself become a pipe that only swallows and spits out matter. Do not let yourself become a part that only executes orders. Do not let yourself become a faceless member of the masses. No matter how noisy the world is, please keep that quiet corner in your heart, to think, to converse. No matter how small the power, please cherish the traces you leave in this world, to act, to speak out. Because, as Arendt said, even if only one person refuses to go along, the perfect world created by totalitarianism will crack. And the light comes in through that crack. Thank you everyone, I am your friend Raymond Shadow, and I will see you next time.